This is Holocaust Memorial Week organized. Good evening. This is Holocaust Memorial Week organized by the History Society and Junior College of Pilsen College in collaboration with the Consular Journal of Israel in Mumbai. I welcome Honorable Mr. Ramesh Gauri Raghavan, our Speaker of the Day, and all respected dignitaries present here. I welcome all my dear fellow students and friends. I welcome you all to the inaugural session of the Holocaust Memorial Week and hope this week goes with lots of gratitude and prayers. I now would like to invite Atharva Kantri to speak and advance us a little about Holocaust Memorial.
Good evening, everyone. I am Atharva Kanti, and I would like to speak a few words about our Holocaust Memorial Week. Firstly, I would like to thank the History Society, Junior College of Pilsen College, and the Consulate General of Israel in Mumbai for giving us this opportunity to organize such activities. Today is the day one of our week with Ramesh sir's topic on Jewish identity in India, which will be followed by the activities which are mentioned in our posters till the 27th, which is the Holocaust Memorial Day itself, where we have planned an interaction with Holocaust survivor Miss Berlinger. I hope you will like the activities and the events that we have planned for the week. And I have one small request for everyone that please fill the feedback forms at the end of every session because it will help us immensely to improve for our further events. Now, without further ado, I would like to call Sahil here to introduce today's speaker. Over to you, Sahil.
Thank you, Atharva. Good evening, everyone. I am Sahil Joshi from the History Society of Wilson College. I would like to introduce you to our today's speaker, Mr. Ramesh Gauri Raghavan sir, who is going to be speaking on the topic Jewish identity in India and who is a media professional with over 12 years experience in the field of digital marketing and is also an independent researcher in the field of ethnoarchaeology, linguistics and epigraphy. He has been a research scholar at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, research assistant at the India Study Centre Trust, project assistant at the National Chemical Library, and is currently working with Ion Cure Tech Private Limited. He is also actively interested in the fields of artificial intelligence, data sciences, ancient Indian games, micro communities, and intercultural interactions. It's a privilege to have you here, sir. Thank you for joining us today. And now, before we begin with the talk, I would like to mention a few house rules here. There will be a question and answer round after Sir has finished his talk. If you have a question, you can type it out on the chat box itself and we will read it out on your behalf. Or else, you can type Q for a question and C for a comment. And when we call out your name, you can unmute yourself and ask the question or mention your comments. Thank you once again. I would now like to hand it over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sahil. I hope I am clearly audible.
Yes, sir.
Right. So I am sharing my screen right now. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir. We can see
Yes,
it.
sir.
Right. So I'm going to cover the Jewish presence in India from 175 BCE to the present. So it all starts with the arrival of the Bene Israel community in India. So there are several Jewish communities in India, and let us have a good look at most of them. But much of my research and most of the people I know uh, concern the Bene Israel. That's the group among whom I have the most friends. And therefore, I will apologize in advance if this is a bit of a lopsided presentation. It will mostly be about the Bene Israel, but I will cover the other communities. So we start with this period of 175 BCE, and few centuries from that period, you see there is an enormous amount of trade that happens from the western coast of India. So in the early historical period, which is from the second century to about the fifth century, second century BCE to about the fifth century CE, you have what is famously known as the Indo-Roman trade, uh, or the Indo-Byzantine trade. This was followed in the early medieval period by the Indo-Arab trade period, with a hiatus in between. But in many of these trade periods, the coast has been a major center of human population movements, and there are many communities on the west coast of India who have settled from various places abroad. So the Parsis come here, the Jews, the various Jewish communities come here, many Muslim communities, many Christian communities, and so on and so forth. So we will look at the Jewish communities today. Okay, the major ports and in the ancient period were Shurparaka, what is now known as Sopara, Kalyana, still called Kalyan, and Chemulaka or Chaul, okay, on the north part of the western coast, and there are a few other minor ports. And then two major metropolises in the interior, Pratisthana and Tagara. In the ancient period, in the modern period, of course, the two great metropolises are Mumbai and Pune, and Mumbai is the preeminent port of our times. Okay. So, among the communities that settled, the Bene Israel are one of the most interesting ones to me. They have been known by various other names as well. How they took the name Bene Israel, I will come to. But earlier they were known as the Shanivar Telis. And in colonial records, they are often referred to as the native Jewish caste or the native Jew caste. Okay. The founding book of history of the Bene Israel is this one by Chaim Samuel Kehimkar. Okay. His grave was recently rediscovered and refurbished at the Wadley Cemetery in Bombay. Though they spent nearly 2 millennia in the district of Raigad, much of the history of the Bene Israel, much of the history. Yes, ma'am? May I continue?
Yes, please.
Ah.
Yes.
Much of their history was written down only after their migration to Mumbai, and we don't really know much about what they were doing prior to this migration. Okay, so this used to be a Bene Israeli family of the 19th century. You will see that the women have adopted purely Marathi dress, including wearing the nut and Maharashtrian style jewelry. The men, on the other hand, adopt somewhat mixed dressing. So you can see there are Islamic style caps, okay, full kaftans and things. But the Bene Israel adopted many other Maharashtrian customs. So one is the tendency to take a surname that ends in the name of the village plus Kar. So most of their names are like Kehimkar, Cheulkar, Vakrolkar, and so on and so forth. Okay, and most of these villages are in the district of Raigad and a few in the district of Thane. Okay. Uh, Now, it was long argued as to what the origin of the Bene Israel was. Now, their own oral belief was that they were one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Okay, so this is a major part of Jewish history that in 722 BC, uh, uh, the land of the Jews had been divided into two kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. There were 10 tribes in the kingdom of Israel. When that country was conquered by the Assyrians, those tribes were dispersed from that land. And they migrated here and there and they ultimately got lost. So the people of the Jewish people surviving are the people of the kingdom of Judah that remained independent. However, there have been other migrations away from that area. Okay, so one of the migrations that happened was in 175 BC when they were persecuted by a local king known as Antiochus Epiphanes. So while these two theories have been debated, now we know that it is the latter theory that holds true. In fact, genetic studies have been done that show that the Bene Israel are actually genetically show very great similarity to the tribe of the Kohanim. The Kohanim were, you could call them a tribe, you could call them a caste, but they were a very highly placed social group among the Jews and who had the hereditary right to be priests. They also had the hereditary right to press oil from olives. So even today, olive oil that is used for ceremonial purposes can only be extracted by a person of the Kohanim tribe, also known as a Kohen. It also possibly explains why they took up the business of oil pressing when they came to India. So it has now been well established that the Bene Israel are in fact deeply related to modern Israelis uh, and are in fact part of the Kohanim tribe. Okay. So before this, they have long been known as the Shanivar Teli. So there are three kind of Teli communities in the Konkan. The Shanivar Telis are those whose rest day is Saturday because that is the Jewish rest day. There are also the Shukravar Telis who are Muslim Telis. Their rest day is Friday. And then there are the Somvar Telis who are Hindu Telis whose rest day is Monday. Okay. Uh, Unfortunately, today they used to be at the peak of their numbers in the starting of the 20th century. They used to be up to 70,000 Bene Israel in Mumbai and Thane, and a few more in the Raigad district. But today, fewer than 5,000 Bene Israel total are resident in India, of which about 4,000 of whom live in Thane, and their numbers are dwindling by the day because many of them have taken up the migration to Israel. So there is after the creation of the state of Israel in 1948, the state had a policy of aliyah, which is, to put it in Hindi, it is ghar wapsi. And whoever is a recognized certified Jewish person has the right to uh, aliyah and can go and settle. So after 1948, many Bene Israel started migrating to Israel, and their numbers have declined very greatly in India. One of the interesting things that has happened is because many of them were Telis, especially the ones who were still in the rural areas, when they migrated, the villages were often left without an oil presser. And that had an impact on the consumption patterns of oil. Okay. So this is the late David Vaskar. He was rather the last person who was still in the oil pressing industry. So as of today, none of the Shanivar Telis are in the Teli business anymore. Okay. Now to come to the origins of the Bene Israel. Okay. This is the memorial to the arrival of the Bene Israel at Navgaon. Okay. Uh, the memorial is present at the Navgaon cemetery, okay, which is the oldest cemetery of the Bene Israel anywhere in India. Okay, this is the Jerusalem gate of the cemetery, which was built by contributions from the Indian Jewish community now living in Israel. Okay, what is the origin of the Bene Israel? So, what does this monument symbolize? So, the oral legend of the Bene Israel says that in a very, very long time ago, the Bene Israel were shipwrecked off the coast of Raigad district, uh, and only 7 men and 7 women survived. And they made it to the land, and everybody else drowned. Along with their prayer books and everything pertinent to Jewish culture. So these 7 men and 7 women barely made it alive to the land at the same place at Navgaon. and were almost in half dead condition. And then they say, as per their legend, that the prophet Elijah appeared to them, uh, and he revived them and he gave them the profession of oil pressers. Okay, not all Bene Israel necessarily believe in the legend, but the common legend is that 7 men and 7 women survived the shipwreck. And then all that they could remember were the dietary laws. The Jewish dietary laws are known as kashrut. Okay, according to which I will tell you two, but it's quite a complex set of laws. One is that you cannot consume any seafood that does not have scales. So no prawns, lobsters, none of that is permitted to them. They can only eat scaled fish. And the second is that they may not mix dairy products with meat products. Okay. And then there are many other kashrut rules. Okay. Anything that is in line, in compliance with kashrut rules is known as kosher. So the surviving Bene Israel, they knew the kashrut rules, which they have followed, and they remembered some amount of the holy prayer known as Shema Israel. Okay, but more than that, they had known nothing. Nevertheless, they knew that they were different people from those in the place they had landed, but they integrated well. Um, so the Jewish historian Nissim Moses, he says, at the time they landed, the language, local language would have been Prakrit language, so they would have adopted that. They adopted the local custom of wearing clothes, okay, the way Indians took names those days. And they also kept mostly Hinduized names like Abaji, Samaji, Babaji, etc. Okay. And even if you see them now, they have many of them continue to wear the after at least of the older generation. They wear the Nawari sari, they wear the nath. They speak Marathi at home with a few Jewish words here and there. Okay, uh, in the caste system, they were considered halfway between the upper castes and the lower castes. So they were sort of lower caste because they were free to consume meat, okay, but because they were oil pressers and they were important to the village economy, the upper castes also interacted with them. So even though they had a high caste position in Israel originally, they had to settle for a middle caste position here. So this is the origin story. Uh, some people have told me that that there were actually two ships. These are very interesting oral histories which we must record. That there were two ships. That one ship got shipwrecked off the coast of Raigad, Maharashtra, but the other ship continued south and reached Kerala, and the people of that ship are now from the Malabar Jews, okay, which is the other indigenous Jewish community of India, which I will come to. Okay, this is disputed by other historians who say that these Jews arrived uh, close to 2.5 centuries later. Okay, but both Jewish communities have been in India for nearly 2 millennia. Okay, now among the Bene Israel, Prophet Elijah plays a very important role. Okay, he's known as Elijah in English and Eliyahu Hanavi in Marathi. Okay, so this is a place known as Khandala, which is near Alibag, not Lonavala, not that Khandala. This is a place called Khandala near Alibag. Okay, and this what you are seeing here is the famous Prophet Elijah's rock. Okay, or in Marathi it is known as uh, Eliyahu Hannavicha Tappa. Now, this rock is very, very sacred to the Bene Israel. Okay, they say that the prophet Eliyahu made an appearance once again to them. So some believe that he came first time when they were shipwrecked. Not everybody believes that story. but everybody believes that he made an appearance to the Bene, perhaps around 1,000 years ago or something. The dates are not very clear. That there was a terrible storm and people were all afraid of their lives and they were all praying, and that is when Eliyahu Hanavi made an appearance at this rock. That he came in a fiery chariot, pulled by white horses, in a burst of flame and everything. So what they say they see here is the track of the chariot, okay, and the hoof marks of his horses. Okay, so here's a close up of the chariot track that they say, uh, and this is a close up of the hoof mark. This place is very, very sacred to them. So you can see that there are elements of puja. What is interesting is that this place is now also sacred to the other communities of Raigad. So both Muslims and Hindus also offer worship here. Okay. Uh, this is the cave of Prophet Elijah at Mount Carmel in Haifa. And now that many of the Bene Israel have moved away, they often direct their prayers to Prophet uh, Elijah at this cave. Okay, so it's a small cave, and a sort of synagogue has been set up at this cave. Okay, now coming to other aspects of Bene Israel uniqueness. Now this is a typical floor plan of a synagogue. Okay, so it will be always pointed towards Jerusalem. Okay, there will be a cupboard here, okay, where the Ark of the Covenant will be kept. That's there right behind. Okay, then there is a middle platform called the Bima, where the rabbi reads out from the Jewish holy books. Okay, the congregation sits on either side. The men sit on the lower floor. Women are always in a balcony on the upper floor. Okay. Now in India, there is a slight difference. So this synagogue is very typical. This is the Srivardhan synagogue. So this is the Bima platform where the rabbi reads. Behind him is the Ark of the Covenant, which is where the Torah scrolls are kept. The Torah is their religious book. But on one side, you will have a special chair which is meant for Eliyahu Hannavi, and there is a lamp that is lit above that chair. So their belief is that uh, whenever there is a Jewish congregation, the prophet attends and he is their guardian, so he looks over them. Now, Prophet Elijah is very important in Jewish belief, and it is among all Jewish communities. It is believed that whenever there is a circumcision held, okay, uh, there has to be a chair set aside for Prophet Elijah so that he can attend and uh, make sure that it is happening as per the rituals. Okay, but they generally otherwise don't uh, have a place for him everywhere. Whereas among the Bene Israel, he is present at all their functions. Okay, so whenever there's a prayer at the synagogue, there's a chair kept dedicated for him. He's present in all their weddings, funerals, everything. So this is one major belief of theirs. Okay, the other major belief of theirs is the prayer form known as the Malida. So Malida is the name. The dish Malida comes from a dish of the same name, which is often offered at Islamic dargahs. Okay, which is made up of broken pieces of chapati with sugar. But the Bene Israel Malida is radically different. It is made of a base of soaked poha, okay, with nuts of all kinds, okay, and 5 kinds of fruits. It's a fairly simple dish, okay. Just remember that the Bene Israel, for most of their stay here, lived as villagers doing simple village tasks like carpentry, agriculture, and things like that. Were not really very rich all the time, and they made do with simple things in life. So their Marida is also very simple. It is whatever they can get hook on. Okay, but it is very important. it is has been compared to the concept of prasad, in that it is offered at all important functions. So when there is a wedding, there has to be a malida, and then there are special prayers that are said. So, and there is an entire ceremony known as the malida ceremony. If you have a wish that has been fulfilled, you will go to the synagogue and you will do this ceremony. It is done for all kinds of sacred occasions. So there is also an annual urus that is done at the Prophet Elijah's rock, and a malida is offered there. Now what happens is, since many of them are no longer able to come to the rock because they are in Israel, they do the malida at the cave there in Israel. And sometimes they are very much Indian in the sense that if they have asked for a mannat to the Prophet, then they will come and fulfill it by offering the malida at the Prophet's rock. Okay. Then there is also another. So this is a different malida, the full malida with five kinds of fruit and roses and all. We will also There is also malida known as the Pospircha malida, which is kept by a few Bene Israel families, not all of them. Uh, this is in honor of now almost forgotten saint whom they only known as the Pospir. Pospir is a sort of corruption of Paushpir, and this malida happens in the month of Paush. So the Bene Israel largely follow the Hindu calendar as opposed for their secular purposes, and the Jewish calendar for their religious purposes. This is again a historic artifact of them having lived here for a very long time. So they have the post-peer chamalida, which they offer during this time, and it is done because apparently the peer a very long time ago helped rid them of a terrible uh, epidemic. So I thought it was relevant to mention it in these pandemic times. Okay. Now, the Bene Israel lived in great harmony with all the people of Raigad district. In fact, India has the record that no Jewish community in India has ever been harmed in any way. Okay, so unlike persecution that they have faced everywhere else, okay, Indian Jews never faced persecution at the hands of Indians. They were persecuted a bit by the Portuguese, but never, no Indian Hindu or Muslim community has ever, they've never had a riot with anybody. Okay? In the late 18th century, they started migrating to Mumbai in the hopes of better employment, especially with the East India Company. Okay, many of them were employed with the Maratha and the Siddhi armies, and as the East India Company became dominant, they started getting employment there, and it is this that led to major rejuvenation of their faith. Okay, so here you see the first synagogue of the Bene Israel, the Sha'ar HaRachamim. Sha'ar means gate. Okay, Raham is Rehem, mercy. Okay, so the gateway of mercy, or the gate of the merciful. Sha'ar HaRachamim. This is the first Jewish synagogue built in India, this part of India, in 1796 by Samaji Hasaji Divekar. Okay, and the masjid station is not very far away, and that is in fact named after the Jewish synagogue and not an Islamic mosque. Okay, for a very long time, Jewish synagogues were generally known as masjid or masjid. Okay, and how does this synagogue come to be? So Samaji Devekar was a subedar in the 8th Bombay Infantry. Okay, you can see a very rare, much later picture of this regiment on the left. And this was one of the regiments that was involved in the Anglo-Mysore Wars. Okay, and in one of the wars, Samaji Hasaji Devekar was captured by the forces of Tipu Sultan. And for being collaborators with the British, they were going to be put to death, all of them. Okay. Uh, Tipu Sultan's mother apparently had a dream or something, and she told him that I want to visit these prisoners. And he was puzzled, said, okay, fine, go ahead. And so she went to the prison, she saw the vicar praying, okay, rather differently from everybody else. It was not a Muslim prayer, it was not a Hindu prayer, it was certainly not a Christian prayer. So she asked him, who are you? And he said he was Bene Israel. Bene Israel literally means child of Israel. Now, in the Muslim holy books, there is a prohibition against doing any harm to the children of Israel. Okay, so she immediately went to her son and said, you have to spare his life. You will be committing a great sin if you kill him. And therefore, Samaji Hasaji Divekar was spared along with the other Bene Israel soldiers in the Bombay army. I do not know what happened to the others. Okay, they were probably executed. But he made it back alive to Bombay, and in gratitude to the mercy shown on him, he built this synagogue. This is a modern structure. The synagogue has been built and rebuilt many times, but it is the oldest synagogue of Mumbai. Okay, this is an inner picture. Okay, you can see the bima in the center where the rabbi reads to the congregation. Okay, the seats, the congregation, and you can see the seat of the prophet on the right side. And this also started the great Jewish revival of the Bene Israel. Okay, so although they had not known many of their original Jewish customs, there were two people who came into their life who really changed a lot of things for them. The first is a partly, it's not very well attested historically, but there was a person known as David Rahabi. It is not very clear where he came from. Some people say that he was a Jew from Cochin. Okay, they are again, they are people who had migrated there many years ago, and they were still following many Jewish customs. Other people say that he was actually an Egyptian Jew. It's also not very clear when David Rahabi met the Bene Israel. Some people say it was just a couple of centuries ago. Some other people say it was nearly a millennium ago. Okay? And he is also apparently buried somewhere in uh, Raigad district, somewhere near Alibag, but his grave has remained undetected. Okay, it is said that he was a merchantman and a rabbi who was traveling in these areas when he noticed the women were doing something very odd. That they were separating scaled fish from unscaled fish and throwing the unscaled fish away. Okay, then he subjected to them to a few more tests. He met the men also and he heard them recite the Shema. It was not in a form that he recognized, but he said, okay, they still seem to know something. So these are lost Jews. So he thought they were one of the lost tribes. And then he spoke to them and they said, yes, of course, we remember that we came from a faraway land, but this is all we remember of our religion. And he said, I will teach you the rest of the religion. So he, uh, what was in his means, he taught them more prayers, he taught them more rituals, more fasts, and many other things. So they were well on their way to becoming Jewish. Uh, he could not make any of them rabbis because that requires a certain amount of training and all of that. So what he did was three very prominent families. He made them kajis or kazis who could sort of intervene in disputes, solve some religious problems for the people and all. And even to date, there are three main Qazi families among the Bene Israel. Okay. The next advance happens when John Wilson turns up. This is the same John Wilson that founded your college. Okay. He took a great interest in these Bene Israel, and he had this fond hope that they will one day convert to Christianity. And he started passing on many Jewish religious materials onto them. And one of his significant contributions was to create a Hebrew Marathi dictionary. The Bene Israel were very thankful to all his efforts. They said, "No, thank you. We don't want your Christianity, but thank you for all of this. You have made better use of us." So his contribution is immense to the community. Yeah. The other community that had an influence over the Bene Israel were the Baghdadi Jews, who in the late 18th century and the 19th century migrated from many parts of the Middle East. So they're not just from Baghdad, but they are from Yemen, from Iran, from Iraq, Turkey, even in Saudi Arabia, all of those places. There were groups that migrated. All of them commonly spoke Arabic, and in general, the term Baghdadi was used for anybody who came from Arabia those days because it was a great Arabic city. Okay, often like how many Indians will say London to mean the whole of the UK. So this community is known as the Baghdadi Jews. They are the Israeli group known as the Mizrahim. They follow certain rituals and all. The Mizrahim are also known as the Eastern Jews. Okay, so there are a few major Jewish groupings. The Mizrahim of the Middle East, the Hasidim of Eastern Europe, the Ashkenazim of Germany, and the Sephardim of Spain and Portugal. Okay, uh, so the Bene Israel, when they encountered the Baghdadi Jews, they also learned a number of Jewish rituals and customs from them as well. Okay, so after building the Shar HaRachamim, they have gone on to build a few other synagogues. These are the important synagogues in Mumbai. Okay, this top left is the Shar Ratzon, top right is Magen Hasidim, bottom left is Tiferet Israel, bottom middle is Magen David, and on the right is Knesset Eliyahu. The last two are actually synagogues built by the Baghdadi Jews. So although the Bene Israel learned a lot from the Baghdadis never really saw them as truly Jewish people. And then the Baghdadis were native Arabic speakers, the Bene Israel were native Marathi speakers. Ultimately, the two communities never really got on. But these are the important synagogues in Mumbai, and the first three were built by the Bene Israel. There are a few others also. Okay, in Thana, which is now the biggest synagogue in India with a active congregation. This is the Shar Hashamayim, okay, or the gateway of heaven. This is what it used to look like. It was a smallish synagogue, but now more and more floors have been added. There's a community center and a library and all things. So it's become pretty big synagogue now. Okay, this is the Shar Hashamayim of Thana. Okay, so this is what it looks like inside. The inner structure of the synagogue has remained more or less the same. Okay, so this is where the end is where the Torah scrolls are kept. This is the bima. It's been decorated with flowers and also perhaps being prepared for some ceremony. Okay, perhaps a marriage ceremony because they get really elaborate as Indian marriages go. Okay, they also have a very old shofar or a ram's horn which they blow on certain ceremonies. Okay? That's something that they're very proud of. Okay. Now I have mapped as many cemeteries and synagogues that I could find. Okay, in the Raigad district. Okay, many of them I have personally visited. Some of them I have not been able to because of the pandemic. Okay, and there are a few very pretty synagogues as well. Okay, so this is one of the important synagogues for the uh, Bene Israel. This is the Beth El Synagogue of Panvel. So it's a very old picture, and this is a picture of the interior. Okay, this one has also undergone some modification. It has gone undergone some expansion, some modernization, etc. Okay, the thing about the Beth El Synagogue is this is one synagogue where your mannat, if you come here and make a mannat, it will be fulfilled. This is their belief. Okay, it does not hold true for any other synagogue but the Panvel synagogue. Okay, so they come from all over the world, including from Israel, from America, from the UK. They are now settled in many countries, and yeah, pilgrims still come here from very far away. Okay, this is the Beth Ha Elohim synagogue at Pain. It's a small but very beautiful synagogue tucked away in Pain Market, little difficult to find. This is a very tiny synagogue known as the Hesed El Synagogue in Poenad. Okay, it's just a tiny room. It doesn't have an elaborate, like this is the bima, which is a nice structure, and there are lamps and balconies and everything. This is just a room, and the bima consists of this writing desk. It's a very cute synagogue. At most of these synagogues are no longer active because one of the things is you need to have something known as a minyan or a quorum. It has to be 10 adult healthy males. Okay, uh, so without that, a synagogue cannot be operational. Okay, this is the Beth El is a very common name for synagogues throughout the world. So this is the Beth El synagogue at Revadanda. Okay, much of its original architecture is still remaining. Okay, this is another synagogue at Borlai. There are lots of these synagogues all over in many places in Raigad district. Okay, there's also a synagogue in Ambepur which has now been restored. It had been abandoned after all the last people, Bene Israel had emigrated, but now people from Israel are taking some interest, coming back, spending their own money, refurbishing cemeteries, refurbishing synagogues, and all that. There are also a whole lot of cemeteries in Raigad district as I had mapped, but this is one that I had discovered along with Dr. Kurush Talal and others when he was excavating at Chandore. This is known as the Telinsa Mashmoda. Mashmoda in Konkani Marathi means a burial ground. Teli is of course because they were oil pressers. So the locals called it Telinsa Mashmoda, and after some sleuthing, we found out that this was a Bene Israel cemetery. It is also oriented east-west because, as per their customs, you must be buried with your feet facing Jerusalem, so that on Doomsday, that is the day when the world ends, okay, and God descends and the kingdom of God will begin, then you will wake up and start walking towards Jerusalem. So you have your feet facing Jerusalem. Okay, this was a discovery, and apparently it had been abandoned around the 1950s after the last family of oil tailis from Chandore had done Aliyah. Okay, and then another family was like, they went to the neighboring villages and they begged, and one family resettled in Chandore to continue the oil pressing business, but they also emigrated in the 1970s, and after that there have been no Bene Israel. So the very very old people still remember this with some bittersweetness. They just keep telling us that they would have at least liked it that you would have told us that you were leaving. So this is one of the cemeteries I have discovered. There may be many others that have still waiting discovery or may have already been damaged. This is at Padwell. This is a lake known as the Israel Talav, or now the new name has become Vishrali Talav by Apabhrangsha practice. Okay, so under Maratha rule, there were different lakes built for drinking water for different communities, and the Israeli community was given its own lake. Now, their cemetery is here on one bank of the lake, and unfortunately now, because there are almost in hardly any Bene Israel, they're not going to take care of this, and there is a slum that is beginning to encroach. What's interesting is this lake is now sacred to three faiths. So there is a Hindu temple on one side, there is a Muslim dargah on the other side, and then you have the Bene Israel, and all of them consider this lake sacred. So holy water is taken from here for all three purposes. Okay, so there is something known as continuing sacredity, that a place is sacred even when the original religion is no longer being able to use it. Uh, People move on to the new religion, but they still consider it sacred. This is a great example of that. And then these are the many burial types. So I study Jewish cemeteries a great deal, and there have been many styles of burial. The most common one is to have a headstone. Sometimes there's a footstone, and the place is blank. Okay, the tomb is not covered. So it is covered if the person has died without having any children or died as a child. But if the person did leave behind children, then the tomb is not covered. So that a tree or plants can grow out of it, signifying that this person has given life. Okay. So that was all about the Bene Israel community. Now we come to the Baghdadi community, the other major community in uh, Bombay. Okay, they had a presence in Bombay, Calcutta, and later even Hong Kong. So what you see on your right is actually the Beth El synagogue. It looks like a church, but it's actually a synagogue. This is the synagogue of the Baghdadis at Calcutta. Okay, so these are Mizrahi Jews who were living in most parts of the Ottoman Empire. But then over time, the Ottoman Sultan started persecuting them, demanding money, trying to force them to switch to Islam, and so they started fleeing from there, and many of them fled to British India. This was around the late 18th century and the early 19th centuries. They emigrated to Surat first, and then from Surat they came to Bombay and Calcutta. They were originally Arabic speakers, but in contact with the British, they sort of went totally English. So they started taking English Christian names. Although they kept their Jewish faith, they took English names. Okay, they would wear English clothing, and they became very British oriented. And in fact, after independence, most Baghdadis migrated to the UK and Australia rather than to Israel. A few of them went to Israel, but most of them chose to go to the Anglosphere. They had a very tight trading and kinship network. Okay, we have the Sassoon families of Bombay, the Ezra family of Calcutta, and a few others, the Reuben family. Okay, and now many of them have migrated to the UK, where they are still one of the richer people in the UK. Okay, the Sassoons in particular have left behind a massive stamp on the uh, heritage of Bombay. There are so many buildings in Bombay and Pune that carry their name. So on your top left, you see Sassoon Dock. This is the Sassoon Library in the middle. Okay. Then the two synagogues, the Magen David and the Neset Eliyahu. And what you see in the center is the Sassoon Hospital of Pune. Okay. To your right is the original Sassoon family. Seated is David Sassoon, or rather Dawood Sassoon, the original who had migrated from Baghdad to Surat and then to Bombay. He only spoke Arabic for all of his life. Okay, sitting next to him is his son Abdullah Sassoon. Okay, but he later on took the name Albert Sassoon. Okay, And then there are other sons. This is his son David Sassoon Jr., who you can see is dressed like an Englishman. Then, uh, so these were the Baghdadis. They have a lot of contribution, but they spent less than 2 centuries in India compared to the others who were here for 2 millennia. Okay, so very few of them remain in India today. Most of them are out. Okay, but their contribution has been immense. Okay, now the other major Jewish community in India were the Malabar Jews. Okay, their other names are the Yahudan Mapilla. So in Kerala, there are three Mapilla communities. Okay, the Muslim Mapillas, whom we know as the Mapillas, the Christian Mapillas, also known as the Syrian Christians, and the Yahudan Mapillas or the Pochinim or the Malabar Jews. Okay, now these are people who migrated after the Romans broke the second Jewish temple in 1770 AD, and very Jewish people migrated out of there, and about 10,000 of them, they say, came to Kerala, and they settled here in various places. Okay, and they became one with the Malayalam people. So they adopted the Malayalam language, uh, the Malayalam dress. Okay, they, uh, many other Malayalam customs, and they were mostly involved in trading, especially the pepper trade, as well as many other professions. Okay, uh, I will tell you about the Paradesis a little later. These are the very famous Cranganore copper plates. Okay, so in AD 1000, the Cochin Jews were given a few rights by the Chera ruler Bhaskara Ravi Varma. So these copper plates, okay, a replica of which now is in the National Museum of Israel in Jerusalem. Okay, the original is somewhere in Kerala. They're written in the Vattat script in the ancient Malayalam language, which is very similar to the ancient Tamil language. Okay, where they have been given certain rights, especially to practice their faith without any interference, to live in peace among everybody else, to certain land rights and other things. Okay, so this is almost like the founding charter of the Malabar community. Okay, they had a very most of them after 1950s have also emigrated to Israel, where they have a few. They are settled in a few towns and villages there, but they had a number of synagogues in many parts. Okay, many of them, Mattancherry and Ernakulam, are both suburbs of Cochin. So they had a number of synagogues in Cochin and in a few villages around. One of the more elaborate synagogues that's no longer in existence is the Paravur synagogue. Okay, so this is the Ark of the Covenant of the Paravur synagogue. This is now in Israel. It's preserved in a museum somewhere. Okay, very few, almost none of these synagogues are active anymore. One of them has been converted to a museum which memorizes the Malabar Jews. Okay, and some of them have even been demolished, unfortunately. Okay, uh, see, I have not studied this community as extensively as I've studied the Bene Israel. So I don't know much about them, but they have two interesting traditions that stand out. One is the religious songs known as Piyutim, okay, which are in Judeo-Malayalam. So Malayalam is what they speak, but with a lot of touch of Hebrew words in it. That is known as Judeo-Malayalam, and they have many songs written in that dialect, which is sung by women. Now, apparently, in certain Orthodox readings of Jewish law, women are not allowed to sing. Okay, uh, but yeah, these communities don't obey that law. Different Jewish rules were different periods, so they weren't exactly in touch with most of European Jewry, so they sort of uh, don't obey certain rules that were written later. Another thing that I found very interesting is they play a game known as Asha, okay, which is played on ritually played on the fast day of Tisha B'av. So it's a very important fast because it commemorates the destruction of the temple, and no other Jewish community does this, but for the Kochinim, uh, the playing of Asha is one of the ways in which they commemorate the festival. Okay. Now, while the Kochinim were living there, in the 15th and 16th centuries, a number of Portuguese Jews came and settled here. Okay. They were driven out by, the Inquisition and generic Catholic zeal from Spain and Portugal, and they came and took refuge in India. So they lived mostly in two places, Cochin, where they traded in pepper, and also some of them went and lived in Madras, where they formed an active Jewish community for a very long time. So this, what you see of the picture here, is the uh, famous Paradesi synagogue of Cochin. Later in the 18th and 19th century, some Baghdadi Jews also came and settled and lived among the Paradesis. They're called Paradesis to sort of contrast them from the Malayalam speaking native Jews, who are known as the Malabar Jews. Okay? And there are two castes among the Paratesi, the white Jews, who were mostly European, and the black Jews, who are mostly mixed European African ancestry. And the black Jews weren't really treated very well. Okay, so the caste system, you can't escape that caste system anywhere in India. Now, when they came from Spain and Portugal, they used to speak the Ladino language. But when they came here for trade purposes, they have also learned Tamil, Konkani, as well as Judeo-Malayalam. Okay. In the 1950s, almost all the Paradesis left. There was about one family staying on. I think they have also since gone. They are mostly, now the Paradesis allied themselves again with the English. So they did an aliyah to Israel, but then since then most of them have again moved on to Europe, UK, USA, Australia, etc. Okay, so this is the famous Paradesi synagogue from the inside. It is the oldest synagogue in India. Okay, from 1568 AD. Okay, there are certain, see, you can convene and pray, and that is called a prayer hall, but for it to be called a synagogue, it has to have follow certain rules and things and all. So that's why even though the Jews have been around for a much longer time, the synagogues aren't that very old. This is the first one, built by three Pardesi Jews, 1568. Okay, the first synagogue was actually smashed up by the Portuguese. Okay, when they had temporary rule over this area. But later on, they took refuge from the Raja of Cochin, and he gave them land right next to his palace. So the current Paradesi synagogue is right next to the palace, which is known as the Mattancherry Palace. Okay. Along with them were the uh, no, this community known as the Black Jews or the Meshuk Rarim. Okay. Sadly, as I said, they were treated very poorly. They sort of lived at the bottom of the caste ladder. Okay, they were allowed to pray in the same synagogue, but they had to sit on the floor and they had to sit at the back and things. But again, they have also mostly all of them left now. Okay, then there were many Sephardim who went and migrated and lived in Chennai. Okay, there were many major families, de Pavia, de Castro, and others. They are very Spanish and Portuguese sounding names. They were allowed to trade in Golconda diamonds, and they actually became pretty important jewelers, traders in precious stones, corals, everything. Okay, they were not involved in the spice trade unlike the other Parthestus. Okay, and Madras city is the only place where there is a Holocaust memorial in India, commemorating two Madrasi Jews, Isa and Rosa Enriquez, who perished in the Holocaust of 1940s. So they were in Europe and they found themselves in a country from where they could not escape, and they were finally sent to the gas chambers. Okay, but CM Annadurai has actually commissioned this little memorial for them in Madras. Okay, apart from these communities, there are two communities known as Judaizing communities. Okay, where this is now their position is a bit controversial. The one that you see here are known as the B'nai Menashe. These are actually residents of Manipur and Mizoram. They are usually considered members of the Kuki tribe. The Kuki tribe are mostly all Christianized. But these are people in 1951. One of their tribe leaders said that he had a dream that his people's ancient homeland was actually Israel. And then a number of them started converting to Judaism. They went to Israel. They learned some more and more Jewish stuff. They came back. They established a synagogue in Manipur. Okay, there are a few synagogues now in Manipur and Mizoram. Although they claim that they are a lost tribe uh, or descended from the lost tribe of Menashe. Of the 10 lost tribes, the Menashe are one. And to try and prove it, many people got themselves DNA tested, but it could not prove that they had any Middle Eastern ancestry. Okay, they look exactly like all their other neighbors of the Kuki people. They're the same language, the same culture, the same food. Okay, so there were actually allegations that they are just trying to convert to Judaism and in order to escape the poverty and violence of India. There was a lot of argy-bargy, nasty stuff was said from both sides. Finally, in 2005, the chief rabbi of Israel, now he's the one who can declare whether you're Jewish or not. He said that they will be considered as a lost tribe and they are allowed to come and settle in Israel. However, since their Jewishness has been a little bit in doubt, they have to formally convert to Judaism before they can enter Israel as settlers. I mean, you can take a tourist visa and go, no problem. So that they are a little upset about because, like the Bene Israel, for example, or the Baghdadis did not have to undergo, or the Kochinim did not have to undergo any such conditions. Okay, in fact, the Bene Israel also had to initially undergo a proper Jewish conversion. Then they protested, and then in the 1960s, it was settled that they are actually Jews and they don't need to, formally convert. But for the Bene Menashe, they have to do so. And the last are the Bene Ephraim. Now, this is a very tiny community in Andhra Pradesh, uh, in Guntur and Krishna districts. There's just 50 families, a very tiny community. But they claim that they are descended from the lost tribe of Ephraim. Okay, now many people are saying that this is again their attempt to escape their poverty. Many of them were actually socially Dalits in that region. So they're saying that they're just trying to convert to Judaism and claim descent from a lost tribe in order to, escape poverty and escape social oppression and do so. Now, again, it is for the uh, chief rabbi of Israel to take a final call. What we say does not really matter. Okay. Then there are, of course, they have the Jewish people have contributed in many interesting ways to India. So these outside of the community, the major Indian communities, there are a few very interesting Jewish people in Indian history. The first you see here is Garsha the Orta. He was a Portuguese Sephardic Jew, but he actually pretended to be a Catholic so that he would not be persecuted. And he settled in Bombay, and he was actually given the whole island of Bombay as its owner. So he was like the landlord. This is not our modern Bombay, but one of the seven islands then. He was given the whole island as its landlord, and he built Bombay Castle, okay, which later on became the home of the East India Company governor and still continues as INS Angre. And he was a botanist, and he studied a lot of Indian plants for their medicinal value and all. Okay, so he is quite the pioneer, much recognized today. Later on, after he died, the Portuguese found out he was actually Jewish, and so they desecrated his grave. They punished his sister. So, she was tortured very badly before being killed by the Portuguese Inquisition. Yeah, but today, uh, his contribution is recognized world over. So in India, in Goa, in Bombay, okay, and also in Portugal and other parts of Europe, his contributions are now considered immensely valuable. Then there is a very interesting figure known as Sarmat Kashani, who was an Armenian Jewish merchant. Okay, who wandering. He was a merchant, so he came on trading trips to India. But finally, he settled down here. He gave up his material life. He became a Sufi, and he was a mentor to Dara Shikoh. Okay, he even said that God does not have any religion. Why should I? I don't care. I'm not a Hindu or a Jew or a Muslim, and like that. So this is a miniature painting of Sarmad Kashani with Prince Dara Shikoh. Okay. Uh, Unfortunately for him, when Darashuko lost to Aurangzeb, uh, Sarmaj was also executed by Aurangzeb. Okay. Then you have Waldemar Hafkin, another important person. He was a Ukrainian Jew who traveled to the UK, studied tropical medicine, came to India, did a lot of research work here. Uh, He was given the former governor's mansion at Parel to set up a laboratory to study the diseases. He created the plague vaccine, and he lived and died in certain controversies after there were some problems with the vaccine, which were shown to be more. Now we know that they're more to do with government incompetence than anything to do with him. But the Hafkin Institute in Parel, which is where he had set up his laboratory, is named after him. A very important person in the history of Bombay. Okay? Then you have Maurice Friedman. He was a Polish Jew who was very interested in Hinduism. So he traveled from uh, Poland via the UK, came to India, studied a lot of mystic stuff. He took the name Swami Bharatanand. Okay, he's very important because he created the Aund experiment. Now, those of you who have studied the history of the independence movement, Aund experiment was set up to create a Gandhian constitution for India, uh, which is what, which was an interesting experiment, and it has been well written about. You should read about it. But he was one of the major proponents, and he actually drafted the Aund constitution. Okay. Then you have the very famous painter Amrita Shergill. Her father was Punjabi, her mother was a Hungarian Jew. Okay, and she speaks of these influences on her art. Okay, Anish Kapoor is a British artist. He's practicing Jewish. His mother is a Baghdadi Jew from India. Okay, then you have various other Jewish people who have contributed immensely to our arts culture. So Nadira, you see here, Nisim Ezekiel, Pramila, Sulochana, Leela Sampson. Okay, this is David Chevulkar, uh, prominent contributions in the field of arts and sciences, in the field of arts. And this one is General J.F.R. Jacob, one of the heroes of the Bangladesh Liberation War. He is a Baghdadi Jew from Calcutta. He is one of the few who did not go to Israel but stayed on in India and is a national hero here. Okay, so with that, I conclude my session. I have a lot of people to thank: Dr. Kurush Dalal, who got me into researching the Bene Israel, uh, several Bene Israel friends, especially Miss Leora Perez Pizarkar and her father, Mr. Perez Pizarkar, who helped me a lot with a lot of things. Professor Shalva Vale of the Hebrew University, who's also been my mentor. Dr. Kenneth Robbins and Dr. Pushkar Sohoni, who helped me with a lot of images and a lot of advice, and a whole lot of other people who have helped me in many ways, big and small. Yeah. So thank you very much. I hope this was a good uh, curtain raiser for the commemoration week.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we will have the question and answer round. And like mentioned earlier, you can either type in your question in the chat box and we will read it out for you, or you can type the letter Q if you want to raise a question, or you can type the letter C if you want to share your comments. So participants, please send your questions in the chat box. Also, we have shared the feedback form, and we would appreciate if everyone takes time to fill it out because we need your feedback to, improve the future sessions. Rohit Trivedi has a question. I had a question regarding the entry to the synagogue. Is everyone allowed or only Jewish people?
So on Saturdays, that's their prayer day. They usually don't allow non-congregation members that day. So even if you're Jewish and you're not a member of that congregation, you won't be let in. But otherwise, they are okay with you coming and seeing the synagogue. If you are respectful and you cover your head, you're okay. Apostle Thomas came in AD 52. The Jews didn't come with him. And the people who came with him are the initial Syriac Catholics or the Syrian Christians. They're sometimes known as the Nasrani Mapilla.
Does anyone have any questions? They can put it in the chat box. Okay, Sahil has a question. So, can you
Mhm.
please suggest any book on the Bene Israeli community?
History of the Bene Israel by uh, Samuel Keinkar.
Rahul Chandra has a question. If someone claims to be Jewish, how do you either recognize it or disregard it?
That is a question for the rabbis, the Jewish priests. They will ask you a few questions. It's their call, not mine. I mean, a lot of people say they're Jewish because they have Jewish ancestry. If gram, see, your Jewish descent is considered from your mother's line. If your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. If your nani is Jewish, you're Jewish. But it's one thing to be racially Jewish and it's another thing to be religiously Jewish.
Rahul has sent another question. Is there an agency in Mumbai or Pune that conducts the DNA tests?
There are many agencies. There's one called 23 and Me. You can actually order their kit online as well. They'll send you the kit, you take a sample and you send it back.
S. Acharya has raised their hand. Would you like to unmute?
Yeah, Raveshji, I just have a question. I mean,
Yes.
can you just elaborate more on the Baghdadi Jews, and if you have any more details of them about the presence in Kolkata, because they have a very old synagogue which is there, and there is a street beside it which is named Synagogue Street, and you named somebody called Ezra, and we have the entire wholesale electrical market, a very big market, named after that. I mean, those. That person is just over here. Any details about him?
Yeah, so the I showed you the picture of the Bethel synagogue at Calcutta, right? So they have it's been about 150 years or something. They set up that synagogue. Most of the congregation has gone abroad now. The Ezra family were very prominent, and they have contributed to Calcutta in the way that the Sassoons have contributed to Bombay. I know very little about them though. Uh, yes, the Synagogue Street is where Bethel stands, and the Ezra Market is named after this very prominent Ezra family. So different families settled in different places, and so what David Sassoon did, for example, is while he was based in Bombay with a holiday home in Pune, he had sons in other parts. So there is a branch of the Sassoon family that was settled in Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong Sassoons would buy from China and send it on to Bombay, and then from Bombay it would be sent on further to Europe. So the family had members stationed along the trade route. So similarly, the Ezra family, the Reuben family, and there are a few more families like that. So some were super rich families, and some were okay, modest families. Does that answer your question?
We'll move on to the next question. Sana has asked, were the Jewish partially Maharashtrians? Are there current people who are Maharashtrians of Jewish ancestry?
So the Bene Israel are of both Maharashtrian and Israeli heritage. They and many of them have they do not really follow the Jewish rules of whom to marry, whom not to marry, and all that because they had lost connect. So in fact, many of them have married among the natives. Uh, so there are all the Bene Israeli are technically Maharashtrians because they live here, they belong to this culture, everything. They're just Jewish Maharashtrians. So there are about 4,000 of them still here. I have good friends who are still here.
There's another question by Poonam Samajpati. What was the religion in which they considered Bene Israel as the child of God?
Bene Israel means child of Israel, and in both Christianity and in Islam, these are people who are God's people and they cannot be hurt.
Shravani Pawar has raised the hand. Shravani,
Sure.
please unmute.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you so much, sir. It was a very fascinating thing to know about all the communities and their contribution. And I have a question that many Jews, as you said, that I wanted to ask that how they feel about the India. Do they have any problems that they had to change their culture, they had to change their language, they have to change their social, status also? Do they feel some kind of now there is a big question of identity and whole that thing, so do they have feelings like this, or they feel that yes, it's fine, sometimes we have to change?
See, once you come, go and settle in one place, over time you will become part. So your language will change after three generations. Automatically, your language changes because you're talking. See, you may retain your native language when you migrate. Like I am a Madrasi who was migrated to Mumbai, you know. So my grandfather's generation came here. They only knew Tamil. So, but then my father's generation they knew both Tamil and Hindi and Marathi and all. And in my generation, I barely know Tamil, but more of Hindi and Marathi. So over time, the language changes automatically. And similarly, all the customs and all, you after all, you integrate with the people you live among. And many of them did not come in circumstances that helped them, that they were not really able to hold on to their old culture. Today we have radio, we have TV, internet, everything. We're able to hold on. We can easily go back to our native villages. But those days it was practically impossible. So that happened. But most Bene Israel who I know are 100% Marathi and 100% Israeli. They are proud of both their heritages.
Parth Bane has asked a question: does Bene community only use Marathi language in daily communication, or they use Hebrew also?
Hebrew is those who live in Israel they speak in Hebrew because to talk to everybody else they have to speak in Hebrew. But at home they speak in Marathi. Saurabh Verma asked that the synagogues built by the Bene Israel allow people of only their community or all Jews are allowed. Not only Jews, anyone can go to a Bene Israel synagogue, uh, except on Saturday when they have their prayers and their. Also now after the 2008 incident, all of these synagogues are now protected by police. So if you don't carry a I card, then you have to get prior police permission and all that.
Nadia Shinde has asked, if there are no descendants left in a particular synagogue to practice faith, what happens to it?
Oh, it's very sad. They just have to close the synagogue. Sometimes there is a keeper who opens it once a week and sweeps the floor and cleans it and goes. But most of the time they just have to abandon the synagogue because there is there ritually there is you have to have a minyan, which is a quorum of 10 adult Jewish males. Nowadays, some of the more reformist thinking is that any 10 adults will do, men or women. But the Orthodox ones say it has to be 10 men of good health. So yeah, but many of the synagogues are just shut, sadly.
Are there any more questions? Okay, Rohit Trivedi has asked, which relics of the original dissidents still remain, and what is the exact address of the holy place in Khandala?
Okay, the address now is a little tricky. So on your way to Alibag, you will come past through a village known as Sogao. Just as you enter the Sogao village, to your right, to keep an eye out for a Hanuman Mandir. From there, you have to take a right turn, then you go through a dirt track a little deep inside. Then you will come to the village of Khandala, which is more like a little tribal wadi, and the rock is there. But I didn't understand the first part of your question. What relics of the original dissidents still remain? Do you want to explain your question?
Sir, would you like to take more questions?
I'm happy to take as many questions as you want.
So Linda Pierce has asked, do the Maharashtrian people with ending names Kar realize their ancestors were Jews?
No, 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 it doesn't work like that. The Kar ending means you come from such and such village. So if you're Chandorkar, it means you come from Chandor village. If you are Mumbaikar, it means you come from Mumbai village. Goregaonkar, Punekar, Panvelkar, Cheulkar, Vakrulkar, so on and so forth. All members of that village would take that surname irrespective of their religion. So you could be Hindu Kar, Muslim Kar, Jewish Kar, anything. It means you come from that village.
Linda also says that she was interested to know that the Prophet Elijah had a part in encouraging them.
Very much. He is their guardian. They invoke him for everything. Yes. So the typical thing is, for example, if your son is not doing well in exams, you would take a you know a manat and you would go to the Panvel synagogue and you would pray and hope that the Prophet will intervene. And then if your son does well in exams, you will go back to the synagogue and you will do a proper Maliga ceremony offering thanks.
Rohit Trivedi has gotten back to his previous question. So he wanted to say, like the ancient things that the Jews haven't carried with them back to Israeli.
Many of them just left with their clothes on their backs. So many of them sold their houses, a lot of property just to make the money for the uh, ticket to go to Israel.
Ananya Narkar has asked, what are some renowned Jewish festivals?
But there are many festivals. So among the Bene Israel, they used to have the annual Urus of eh, Prophet Elijah, which is it's like a Dargah Urus, but they go to the rock and congregate there, and they would offer Malida. That has stopped for now many years because there aren't too many of them now. But they still do Malida at Prophet Elijah cave there. Then there is a Jewish festival known as Purim, which comes around Holi. So it is in Marathi. It is called Holi Chasan, and it's like the Jewish version of Holi. They have a lot of fun and they throw color and all that kind of stuff. Then they have Hanukkah, which is the Jewish festival of light, which comes in the early part of December, which is like Diwali but not the same. So they believe that the story for Hanukkah goes that once they did not have enough oil at the temple to burn even for a day, and they were praying that if the lamp goes out, pura what you call that, upshagun ho jayega. And then the miracle happened that just that little amount of oil, but the lamp burned for a week and a day. So they celebrate Hanukkah by lighting a lamp for 8 days. So it's an 8 day festival. And then they have a whole lot of other fasts and commemorations, and quite a complicated festival thing. But these are their main festivals, which they celebrate with great fervor.
Does anyone have any more questions to ask? Yes, Linda. You can unmute.
Yeah, go on, please.
Linda ma'am, uh, I think you're still on mute. So if you go to the downside of your mobile, you will see the three options. From that, you can choose to unmute.
Okay, thank you. No, I wrote the question down. It seems to me that they began to idolize Prophet Elijah, which is contrary to the Torah, which they followed, the 5 books of Moses. Did they adhere to the teachings of the Torah? I mean, was that the central part of their synagogue readings and teachings?
Yes, they right now they follow the Orthodox line. So it is the Torah that they follow, and they follow it very rigorously. So
Okay,
thing is, they had developed many customs during their long isolation,
I see.
and through that period, the one thing that they remember was that the prophet Elijah looks after them. So
Okay,
he's not. They see the Jews. They know that they cannot worship him, and they don't. But in the same way, say the Catholics venerate the saints.
hmm,
It's something that many Protestants look down upon. But the Bene Israel tend to, they have a higher place for Elijah than the other Jewish communities.
okay. It just seems to have evolved that way. I suppose during the time when they were exiles, I mean, they came to a strange country, and so they latched on to uh, the visions and what was given to them. But then it became like they made it like more than a tradition, it seemed to me. But anyway, thank you.
So Prisha, Vinod, and Shama ma'am have asked the same question. They want to know what made you study and research so much about the Israelis.
Okay, so it started with a cemetery, which, so we were excavating in Chandore and we came across this cemetery. And we didn't know what cemetery it was. It didn't look like a Hindu. I mean, there are lower caste Hindus who also buried their dead. It didn't look like their cemetery. It didn't look like an Islamic cemetery. It was certainly not a Christian cemetery. So then we were wondering what that cemetery is. And then after some prodding around in the village and asking a few people, they said it was the Telincha Masmolda. That is the Teli cemetery. And I was a little puzzled. What do you mean by Teli cemetery? And then we figured that these are the Bene Israel Jews whose cemetery it was. And then I went to the Thana synagogue, which is the biggest and most functional synagogue. And they hadn't heard about this cemetery, but they said there were a whole lot of other cemeteries in Raigad. Then I actually started looking at all of those cemeteries and mapping the cemeteries and seeing how many of them are still there. So over time, my interest started blossoming. And then there was a conference at Madras where I went and presented this paper about how the Bene Israeli religious practices are a bridge between the Semitic and the Dharmic practices. So there are many things that they share with the Dharmic religions, like the concept of Malida as prasada, and the subcontinental practices like wish fulfillment and things like that. So and then sort of my interest persisted. So I made friends across the community. So yeah, that's how it all started.
I think we'll take the last question now. How did they maintain and hold on to their individualist identity for so long, especially at times when there was no access to Israel?
By holding on, so as I said, they remembered two things. They remembered the Shema Israel, which prayer they kept on reciting, even though over time, because they couldn't refer back to the original Hebrew, it got corrupted over a bit. And then they say David Rahabi recognized it and then taught them the Shema again, along with a whole lot of other practices. And they stuck to the kashrut practices, which was following the Jewish dietary law. But otherwise, a whole lot of other Jewish practices they had lost. But they somehow knew these two, and then, of course, the prophet, that he's there looking after. In all of Jewry, the prophet Elijah he is what you would call Chiranjeevi. He lives on and on and on. He has never died. And he is supposed to, oversee that you are following all the rituals correctly. So they remembered all of that, and that's what helped them cling to their identity. And then with interactions with John Wilson and before him David Rabi and later on with the Baghdadis, they learned more and more and better about their faith. They're all little divided. So many of the things that they do, the other Jewish people don't do, and sometimes they make fun of them, and sometimes. So there's a bit of a debate whether they should hold on to these practices. Like, should we continue to do Malida or should we give it up? But then they feel that that's our Bene Israel identity. Why should we give that up? It's not. There's nothing un-Jewish about it. Similarly, their veneration of Prophet Elijah, that has come under a lot of criticism. So yeah, these debates are running, but this is more or less how they have held on to their identity.
Thank you, Ramesh sir, for answering our questions so patiently.
You're
Now I'll
welcome.
call Aarti ma'am to speak a few words.
Ramesh, I must say that every time I meet you, every time I hear you on multiple, subjects, it has always been very fascinating.
Thank you,
Uh,
ma'am.
yes, it has always been, a pleasure talking to Ramesh. And every time I meet him, as I've just said, that he is moving on to some new area of research. He keeps on, talking a lot about all these new interests that he keeps on pursuing. And all the students who are here and individuals who are here, that is one thing that amazes me every time about him, that such a varied interest from genetics to literature to history to ancient games, and now this Jewish history and things like that. And it was such a splendid session that we had today, and it was one of the really fitting session to begin with for this entire week's program that we have. So thank you so much on behalf of History Society and Wilson College, all of our students and people who have gathered over here. It's been a pleasure, Ramesh.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
And in fact, Kurush had actually taken us to that place in Sandore, but we couldn't go in. I just happened to, when I had visited Sandore, at that time we just saw it from outside. And while I was talking to my students while we held the first meeting, I had mentioned that. So it was nice to, kind of know that later on you took it up and have researched so much into it. So thank you so much for all these things, pursuing it so relentlessly, and then coming back to us and sharing it with us.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much,
so
ma'am.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I call Shravani to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. On the behalf of History Society of Wilson College and Junior College of Wilson College, I'm Shravani here to present a vote of thanks to all of you. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Anna Pratima Nikalje, the principal of Wilson College, for showing her support and encouragement for these events. And also, I would like to thank all the teachers for their valuable guidance and help. Now, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to our honorable guests for such a interesting, inspiring, actually, words are left for this session. So, thank you so much, Ramesh, Gauri, Raghavan sir, for such an amazing session, and
Thank
it
you very
was
much.
a pleasure for us to hear all the things which you said. And I hope that this session will help us to understand the diversity of India, and we will be able to respect others more and more, and will be able to more acceptable to the other people. So that's all I can hope for, and hope that this place will uh, be better word for our future generations. And thank you so much for such an amazing session. And now I want to thank all of you for coming here and making this event a successful one. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming here. Your presence means a lot to us. Hope you will continue this enthusiasm and you will participate in all the activities throughout the week. And now I would like to ask Sahil for the next announcement. Over to you, Sahil.
Thank you, Shravani, and thank you everyone for staying throughout the session. Today was the first day of our week-long Holocaust Memorial Week. Tomorrow, which is 22nd of January, Friday, a PDF titled Genesis of Holocaust will be circulated around the groups. On the 23rd of January, Sunday, which is the third day, you would be having Miss Dalia Neumann, who is the Deputy Consul General of the Consulate General of Israel, Mumbai. She is an Israeli diplomat who recently started her tenure in India. And now we sincerely hope to see you all in our next session. Thank you so much.
So, yeah. So thank you everyone. And now I formally announce that session is closed. Please do join for our coming sessions. Thank you.
And before you leave, make sure you all fill the feedback forms. It will also be shared on the group, I think. Thank you everyone for attending.